2 videos ago, I did a movie tag. Among 22 questions, one of them asked, "You are about to die and can only watch one more movie. What's it gonna be?" My answer was this movie. Well, I've watched it now and can, in confidence, say the following. I would miss Dunkirk. Yes. I would miss Justice League. I would miss Avengers 3. I would also miss the solo Ben Affleck Batman movie, among, so many other films. But if this were the last movie I ever saw in my life, I would die a very happy man. Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. To Zack Snyder, David S. Goyer, Chris Terrio, Charles Roven, and Christopher Nolan, thank you for this movie. The story follows Batman and Superman. The events of Man of Steel led to the destruction of one of Bruce Wayne's buildings, giving him reason to despise the Man of Steel. 2 years later, Batman, a 20-year crime fighter, develops a craving to make the Man of Steel bleed for his actions. He steals a kryptonite stone from Lex Luthor and begins training and prep for the impending battle. Luthor, who's got his own agenda, gains leverage on the Man of Steel and sends him to kill the Batman. Using both strategy and common sense, the two brawl. The outcome leads to an emotional truce. The two band together and, along with female badass Wonder Woman, take on Luthor's backup plan, Doomsday. Here we are. After years of waiting, plenty of fan anxiety, and countless decisions made on the filmmaker's part, the world has received Dawn of Justice. It's a very surreal and joyous time. Before seeing this movie, I only indulged in the first teaser trailer. I avoided everything else like the plague. It was hard at first, but I stayed strong, and doing so made this one of the most emotionally rewarding experiences of my life. And that goes especially for witnessing Ben Affleck as the Batman. Dawn of Justice marks the 6th Batman incarnation in live-action film. Christian Bale said goodbye to the role in 2012 with The Dark Knight Rises. He spent 3 films in the suit, leaving an unforgettable impression on fans and pop culture. When this movie was announced, it was revealed that a new face would be entering the cowl. Many actors were considered, among them Josh Brolin. But in the end, the role went to Ben Affleck, and when that news was announced, when it was released to the world, fans promptly went online and declared the apocalypse. When I read the news, I was neither thrilled nor upset. But I figured, given how important the project was, that Snyder had a good reason for that choice. So while I was initially on the fence, I chose optimism over pessimism. And in the many months leading up to this film's release, that's the mindset I have kept. I have read many of the articles that reeked of doubt for this film, but I listened to my heart, which said to me, it will be okay. Per usual, it was on target. Watching this movie made me reflect on how lucky I am to have been born when I was. There are people out there who wish they had been born earlier or later than they actually were, who think they were born in the wrong time. I am the opposite. I am glad I was born in the early 90s. I'm at an age now when I can watch this movie and understand and appreciate all the elements that came together to make this movie possible. It brings to mind the question, where would we be if Batman didn't exist? If The Dark Knight didn't exist? And that question brings to mind one of my favorite books. It is a book that is very close to my heart, very personal to me, given who I am. The book is called The Boy Who Loved Batman. It is written by Michael E. Uslan. He has served as executive producer on a lot of superhero films. The second I finished his book, he became one of my heroes. And I recommend that you read the book, but in a nutshell, He is the reason why we got the Batman portrayed dramatically in film. Since then, the character has seen ups and downs, but I believe his journey through all that mayhem is what led to Nolan's interpretation. Timing is a huge factor, and I can't imagine where the Batman character would be today in this film if not for the efforts of Uslan and Nolan. But in lieu of their efforts, we have characters who I am proud of. I said in my Why I Love Batman video that Batman is my god, and this film reaffirmed why that is. I'm also reaffirmed about why I want to make movies. This film boasts a very attractive ambition that is fearless. Before this movie, I would not have included Zack Snyder on my favorite directors list, but this movie changed that. I'm not sure what it is, but his track record now with superhero films has gotten me now to a point where I am more than okay with him directing Justice League. 4 years ago, after seeing The Dark Knight Rises, I would have said Nolan is the only guy who could and should direct Justice League. But I think he and Snyder have formed a collaboration that has helped Snyder put as much focus on character and story as he does visuals. To be fair, the man did start out as a cinematographer, so his natural inclination is what we see. Composition, movement, color, lighting, that which emphasizes character subtext. For this movie, in place of Amir Mokri, 300 and Watchmen DP Larry Fong took over. And after seeing what he did in this movie with composition, movement, color, lighting, he is now officially one of my favorite cinematographers. He really knows how to show how light can reflect character. Batman hides in the shadows where he actively thinks negatively. The Man of Steel comes into the light to prove his goodwill toward mankind. And Wonder Woman hides in the light, in plain sight. Seeing all three of them together in this movie was a freaking dream come true. It is aesthetically pleasing, emotionally satisfying, and the casting is very good. Surprisingly, I never made a comparison to Christian Bale for Ben Affleck, and in the long run, that's a good thing. His version is much darker than the Bale version, and while we don't get a detailed log of his history as a vigilante, thanks to visuals like a Robin costume with Joker writing all over it, we do get a strong impression his attitude is fueled by tragedy and psychological scars. So, if by chance you are a fan of George Clooney as Batman, then you're not going to like this version. But on the off chance you don't belong in that 2% minority, I would say it's a safe bet that you'll be able to tolerate Batfleck. Wonder Woman is a different case, and it's hard to compare her for me because, to be honest, this movie is my first exposure to her character. So all I can really confidently report is that nothing about her portrayal in this movie upset me. Aesthetically, when I see her standing alongside Batman and the Man of Steel, she looks very powerful. And when she enters frame for the first time, her theme music cues in. And in the moment, I smiled and quietly nodded my approval. Let's now dissect our two villains, Doomsday and Lex Luthor. Jesse Eisenberg may not have been the guy most fans would have chosen, but he is distinctly different from both Gene Hackman and Kevin Spacey. Those two were subtle comparatively. Eisenberg plays the character like a mad scientist, and is equally as animated and charismatic as Jim Carrey was in Batman Forever. And I loved Jim Carrey in Batman Forever, so that's a compliment. As for Doomsday, he is physically scarier than Luthor, but rather than use language to destroy people, he smashes everything. His introduction fuels the finale, which I must say is absolutely glorious. It comes 2 scenes after the fight between Batman and the Man of Steel. The wonderful thing about it is the realistic factors of the two of them clashing are established immediately. Batman requires gadgets to weaken the Man of Steel, because realistically, the Man of Steel could very easily kill him. For me, that whole sequence was... I just loved every minute of it, basically, and nothing about what happened came off as being unfaithful to the Batman ideology re-established by Goyer in Man of Steel, like those rules. And one element in particular that I really appreciated was how whenever the Man of Steel would punch Batman and send him flying across the room, when Batman lands, he doesn't just get up and run back for more. He grunts pain. You can feel his pain, and he slowly gets back up. Me being me, I would have been down for a half-hour-long fight easily, but that, of course, isn't realistic. The good news, though, is that the length of their brawl is just right, and that's very hard to pull off. Like the perfect, fight lengthwise, very hard to pull off, but I think they pretty much nailed it in this movie. I, for one, personally did not feel cheated. Speaking now to the minor, but still significant characters, I am very happy with how Jeremy Irons turned out as Alfred. It is almost impossible to follow and act like Michael Caine, but Irons did very well. Whereas both Michael Gough and Michael Caine were like an old, frail friend, Irons' version is more in the realm of a Lucius Fox type figure. He also does not dress like a butler. He actually dresses like kind of just like a regular guy, a guy who's, well, in his case, what it appears like, based on how it's played, he's been through a lot. What exactly? No clue, but he's been through something, and he chooses to spend his time in the Batcave, where he is of the most use. Another smaller character I was very curious about is the one played by Scoot McNairy. He isn't that well known, but he's usually cast in roles that call for a rebellious edge. His role in this movie is very interesting because he is essentially a pawn, but given how he structurally fits in, I doubt very much so he will be someone you will easily forget, because he's not someone I'm going to forget. Hopefully, the same will be true for Holly Hunter. The actress known for voicing Elastigirl plays a character who deals heavily with Lex Luthor. The two are lip enemies. They never physically duke it out, but their opinions on heroes and security don't click. They have several encounters that, while not emotionally tasteful, are written and directed tastefully. The score is also very tasteful. It was done by Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL, one of the smartest collaborations for a superhero score. Finding the appropriate sound for a hero is vital to the emotion of a successful experience, and every piece in this film was so beautiful that I was inspired to lean forward in my seat many times. The unfortunate part is this is the last superhero film score from Hans Zimmer we'll ever get. He has announced his retirement from the superhero business. I am a tad speechless, but I will muster up thank you for making me appreciate film scores. You are one of my heroes. My notes for improvement do not exist, so instead I will be commenting on a couple of critiques I have read. Number 1, there is too much going on, and the film spends a lot of time setting up for Justice League. You could criticize the film for that, but in the long run, people would have forgotten about films X, Y, and Z, bringing in every individual character leading up to Justice League. If Marvel has taught us anything, it's that fan patience is gone. We want everything right now, and DC has adapted to that mindset. It's also important to acknowledge that this is a movie. It's not a Netflix TV show where you can build up 10 hours of conflict before having the Man of Steel and Batman fight in the season finale. In film, you tell your story in as concise a manner as possible. You say more with less. And that's exactly what David S. Goyer and Chris Terrio achieved by writing intelligent motivations and a genius emotional trigger that helps Batman and the Man of Steel become allies. It is scenarios like that that impress upon me how the best superhero films present challenging moral dilemmas that make you want to see what happens next. And this movie is really good at doing that. For 2.5 hours, I was never bored. There is constant activity. Number 2. This film lacks humor. Having seen this movie twice now, I can confirm this. But this is DC, not Marvel. Do you go into Star Wars expecting Star Trek and vice versa? No. Of course, over the last 8 years we've had superhero humor drilled into our noggins. So it only makes sense when Batman and the Man of Steel meet face to face and there's no humor, our brains short-circuit. The confusion is understood, but the reality is Batman and the Man of Steel are tragic characters. The Dark Knight trilogy threw in comedic moments for good measure.
Miss Kyle. So that's what that feels like.
But in today's market, the only DC film that has any business being funny is Lego Batman. My favorite scene out of this whole movie is very hard to choose, because there's many of them. But I will pull out the scene that reassured me I was going to enjoy the whole movie. It is the opening scene, a reincarnation of the Wayne murders. For me, it is one of the finest examples I have ever seen of a director balancing style with substance. Another smaller moment I loved was seeing for the first time in Batman movie history the credit for Batman, the creation of Batman, being shared by both Bob Kane and Bill Finger. If you know the story, Bob Kane went to Bill Finger, who gave him ideas for the character, which he then used. And yet, in every Batman film, the credit has always read as Batman created by Bob Kane. It makes this movie that much more special. To now wrap this love letter up, I read an article announcing the summer theatrical release for the director's cut of this movie. After I watch that, I will post a spoiler video. Following that, this movie is joining my Blu-ray collection, which is where it belongs. I give Dawn of Justice 5 out of 5 stars. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Now, go be productive and watch this movie.